Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Talking About Marketing is a podcast for business owners and leaders, produced by my dad, Steve Davis, and his colleague at Talked About Marketing, David Olney, in which they explore marketing through the lens of their own 4 Ps: person, principles, problems, and perspicacity. Yes, you heard that correctly. Apart from their love of words, they really love helping people. So they hope this podcast will become a trusted companion on your journey in business.
David Olney, Series 4 is here, and I've got a big ball in my hands right now, and I'm giving it a little polish, and I'm looking into it. And what you might not know is I'm a Gemini, and there's something coming up in the future, not this episode, but a future episode of the podcast that could involve the Gemini. Do you have an inkling?
I have an inkling, and the question is, do you want me to hallucinate about that inkling, or we wait a few weeks to make sure that the Gemini doesn't hallucinate?
There you go. Do a quick Google search relating to things that hallucinate and Geminis, and you'll be ahead of the curve on that one. This time, though, we're looking at context being king and how not to break in an overstimulated world. And I think this is going to be one of the most timely episodes ever, because there's a lot of the world at breaking point at the moment. That's our customers and often us.
Our 4 Ps. Number 1, person. The aim of life is self-development, to realise one's nature perfectly. That is what each of us is here for. Oscar Wilde.
David, last year, which was 2023, you introduced me to the book Change Your Questions, Change Your Life, which is a happy little read. It's quite an interesting, quirky book, and it basically argues that when we ask questions from a judger perspective, such as, who is the idiot who did this, or how stupid was it to do that, versus a learner perspective, which might be interesting approach, what led you to bring that into consideration, etc. I read it and I thought, you know what, I generally try to be a good human. I like helping people get on well in the world, and I think I feel like I do a decent job of being a dad. And then I caught myself a couple of times over summer where I asked rather harsh questions, which almost immediately I realised were judger questions of my kids and myself. And I went, wow. When David Olney talked to me about this book, he said, it seems easy at first, but it's harder. And you were right, David.
Yeah, it's very difficult, particularly with your own self-talk. Like, I find it's much easier to ask learner questions of other people than it is to ask learner questions of myself, because when I do something dumb, it's easier to berate myself because it's fast and it's simple. But, being mean to yourself is as ineffective and unproductive as it is to be mean to anyone else. So it's as critical to get to the point of being able to go, what was I trying to achieve? How did I think that was going to turn out, and what went wrong? Rather than go, you idiot, itself, which is sadly, or helpfully, highly unproductive.
And I do a lot of that. I really speak viciously at myself in a way I would never, ever talk to anyone else.
I've heard it before. When you're trying to solve a technical problem with your own device and you can't get it immediately, you wouldn't beat anyone else up, you'll beat yourself up.
The good thing about these books, you see, these books, this whole podcast, exposing ourselves to the ideas does not make us saints. What it does do is it gives us increased sensitivity to principles and actions so that we can course correct as life goes on, which I think is about the best we can hope for in the way the world is. very few of us can be absolutely perfect. It is about course correction. I do remember, I think it was 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Stephen
Covey?
Yeah, Stephen Covey.
Yeah.
He used the analogy that the big jets that fly from Sydney to LA are off course about 95% of the time. The whole journey is just nudge this way, nudge that, nudge this, which is good. But the reason I raised this, because we have mentioned Change Your Questions, Change Your Life in passing in previous episodes. A new book I read over summer, thanks to you, is called How We Break by Vincent Deary. And towards the end of this book, which is a really fascinating read about a call to being kinder to ourselves, let alone others, he said, we are transformed by love, not by condemnation. And I know that for others, but it is just that reminder. Our self-talk voices can be quite vicious, and we're not going to help ourselves if we don't break that habit.
No, and it's one of the wonderful things about Vincent Deary. He's just this amazing embodiment of asking learner questions to understand other people. But in the book, he gives the example of how he got overwhelmed by, his life, by his professional life, and ended up in a screaming heap. And the initial self-talk was not kind. And until his self-talk became kinder, he wasn't able to get up and get on with life again. And particularly in the terms of small business where our economy looks like it's moving okay at the moment, but in reality, everyone's being careful about money at the moment, where they're the ones spending it or hoping to earn it. And as a consequence of that, people are being more critical of everything. And the more critical you have to be in a complex world, the easier it is to slip in the habit of being critical of others or critical of self. And yet at the end of the day, you can start off trying to think about how to balance the books. And at the end of the day, realize you've actually beaten yourself up and belittled yourself and quite possibly said something nasty to someone you care about. And tomorrow starts a much harder day when you've not been kind to yourself and others than it needs to be.
And thank goodness we often get the chance to say, hey, which I did to my kids, hey, sorry about that. I could have handled that very differently. And you can try and reset the balance. Of course, there's a little bit of residual damage that lingers for a bit. And, we have to work hard to build up that bank deposit. But imagine the state of the account for ourselves. That's the key thing. But there's a double header with this Vincent Deary book. And he's a Scot. He's got that lilting voice that's actually quite calming, and you sometimes don't realize just how transparent and open he's being in this book. It's very brave, but he goes through that, which I think instantly thought of myself and other small business people about that kindness of voice. But the other one he finishes on is really strong about rest, about making rest in your life a project.
We identify ourselves with the person we see on the screen, and we live and die by what is happening to them. The screen can become another mirror, blocking out the world, holding us in thrall to a fixed and limited vision of ourself. As mirrors, screens can be entrancing. We can become lost in the world we created for ourselves. As windows too, they can be entrancing. We can become lost in other people's worlds, sometimes as a way of avoiding our own. We turn to television screens, often guiltily, not so much for an escape as for a reprieve, a temporary armistice. We tune in to the soothing rhythms of coherent dramas when our own is chaotic and exhausting. At the nadir of my own hopeless exhaustion, I remember days when I attached myself to a screen as if to an intravenous drip. I passively imbibed the gentle cadence of others doing what I had become incapable of. At the time I felt ashamed and useless, but looking back now, I see it for the necessary self-soothing that it was. The key corollary of this version of being broken as hard work is to acknowledge that it entails the need for rest and restoration. How good are you at genuine rest? The kind of rest we tried to measure our capacity for in the last chapter when we assessed our vital range. Rest not just as the cessation of demand, but as a positive state with its own distinct physiological, emotional, and mental weather of ease, refreshment, and uplift, a replenishing of our vital resources. And how are you at restoration? At choosing to do things simply because they are joyful and lift your spirits? We tend to think of rest and restoration as luxuries to be earned, the desserts of good behaviour, or a brief punctuation between long sentences of hard labour. This is what I see in the clinic, in my friends, and in myself. Even the totally exhausted and depleted struggle more with rest than they do with being active. Rest is hard work.
It takes work to rest, but if we don't, then we do worse and worse at our labour. And I say this on a day, whereas yesterday being a Sunday at time of recording, I had to pull one of those 14-hour days, literally 14 hours at my desk to try and catch up on a backlog. And his words were echoing around. And I've got to do this. I know it's a short-term thing, but I've got to get back to getting better at working on rest. And I think, if anything, that's a really strong message for all of us in small business, because one thing I've learned, there's always a million things that need doing. Always. And so we can let ourselves lock ourselves out of the importance of rest.
I think the other side of this that's very important too, and you're a very good example of this, and so are a lot of people in small business, because you like what you do, the first 8 hours of that 14 were probably kind of fun, if we're being honest.
Yeah.
Because you like writing creative things, you like helping people, you like solving a problem so it goes away and people don't have to worry about it. And at a certain level, it feels so productive and so positive sitting and working that it's that thing of, hang on, it's working on Sunday when everyone else in the family is at home and we could do something. Hang on, I didn't just do a few hours on a Sunday when everyone else was asleep. I spent the whole day. So it's about getting that broader context of, what does your work mean to you? But where's the balance between work and everything else that matters at least as much or possibly even more?
And I love how we've opened our first person segment of our series 4 with a conundrum, because you're dead right. That impacted. I'm normally the cook in the house. I had to cook under a lot of stress and pressure yesterday to fit it in. And, I was just quiet and closed off as we ate, because I knew I had another 4 or 5 hours still to go. Yeah. And so the temptation was to say, Steve, you absolute idiot, and go back around. So this is the conundrum. It's like that great image of the serpent chasing its tail.
Yep.
We've got to live with that and just gradually peel back and shed that old skin.
Yep.
And there's no easy way, is there?
No, just try not to bite your own tail off.
Our 4 Ps. Number 2, principles. You can never be overdressed or overeducated. Oscar Wilde.
Prego, David, ciao.
Oh no, there's about to be a flying pizza.
We read an Italian book over summer. Well, I read it over summer. You've read it before.
I've read it a couple of times before. Now, do you want me to say his name? Because it took me weeks to work out how to say it properly.
I'll do the title, you do the name.
Okay.
The book we're talking about is The Book of the Courtier by
Baldassare Castiglione.
Yeah. Espresso. And so, interesting book, because the way you sold it to me, David, is that you've read The Prince by Machiavelli, and that really is primary school. It's kiddie stuff. This is the real book that helps you understand how to navigate the corridors of power And I read it and I was drawn in, and it was these gentlefolk, aristocrats, over the course of a number of evenings, setting up questions and debating. And towards the end, probably halfway through, I really started to get jack of these people. They were mouthing a whole lot of things that just seemed to disengage from any sense of evidence or strong argument. It was just, I've done talkback on 5AA. I've had people call up who just mouth off stuff that they're 100% confident of, and if you had the time to say, well, how do you know that, and go down 3 or 4 levels, they have no idea. They're just mouthing stuff.
Here, without waiting longer, my Lord Gaspare Pallavicino said, "In order that our game may have the form prescribed, and that we may not seem to slight the privilege given us to contradict, I say that this nobility of birth does not appear to me so essential in the courtier. And if I thought I was saying what was new to any of us, I should cite instances of many men born of the noblest blood who have been full of vices, and on the other hand, of many men among the humbly born who by their virtue have made their posterity illustrious. And if what you just said be true, namely that there is in everything this occult influence of the original seed, then we should all be in the same case, because we had the same origin, nor would any man be more noble than another. But as to our differences and grades of eminence and obscurity, I believe there are many other causes, among which I rate fortune to be chief. For we see her holding sway in all mundane affairs, often amusing herself by lifting to heaven whom she pleases, although wholly without merit, and burying in the depths those most worthy to be exalted. I quite agree with what you say as to the good fortune of those endowed from birth with advantages of mind and body, but this is seen as well among the humbly born as among the nobly born, since nature has no such subtle distinctions as these, and often, as I said, the highest gifts of nature are found among the most obscure. Therefore, since this nobility of birth is won neither by talent, nor by strength, nor by craft, and is rather the merit of our predecessors than our own, it seems to me too extravagant to maintain that if our courtier's parents be humbly born, all his good qualities are spoiled, and that all those other qualifications that you mentioned do not avail to raise him to the summit of perfection. I mean talent, beauty of feature, comeliness of person, and that grace which makes him always charming to everyone at first sight." Then Count Ludovico replied, "I do not deny that the same virtues may rule the low-born and the noble. But, not to repeat what we have said already, or the many other arguments that could be adduced in praise of noble birth, which is honoured always and by everyone, it being reasonable that good should beget good, since we have to form a courtier without flaw and endowed with every praiseworthy quality, it seems to me necessary to make him nobly born, as well for many other reasons as for universal opinion, which is at once disposed in favour of noble birth. For if there be 2 courtiers who have as yet given no impression of themselves by good or evil acts, as soon as the one is known to have been born a gentleman, and the other not, he who is low-born will be far less esteemed by everyone than he who is high-born, and will need much effort and time to make upon men's minds that good impression which the other will have achieved in a moment, and merely by being a gentleman."
It really frustrated me, David, and you're about to tell me that I missed it. I missed the ball.
Well, I think it's totally okay to be frustrated, but it's about working out why you were frustrated. The key thing with Castiglione is he was able to serve people at that elite level in Renaissance Italy, but he himself was not of that level. And the key lesson he's trying to outline is when you are advising people, you have to understand where they live, what they think about, what they're interested in, what affects their status, what affects their reputation, because that is the only world they want to maintain. They're not interested in your world. They hire you to help them with their world. And it's the biggest thing I've seen in my years of consultancy, the number of consultants who go, "I've got an idea and I'm going to impose it on you and it'll be good for you." And of course the answer is no, it's not. Because the consultant's world has very little to do with their client's world. And the difference is a consultant who spends a lot of time getting to know who is the client, what is their business, what is their reputation, what world do they run in? What world do they want to run in? That unless you can address all those things, don't open your mouth. And the power of Castiglione is the recognition that even though he is a social class below the people he works for, and he doesn't have real power, he's treated with respect and he's listened to, because his answers are always grounded in a bigger world than the people he works for, but expressed in terms that make sense to those who pay money to maintain their reputation and position.
If I was to boil down what I took away from the courtier, it's something that I live by or strive to live by, and that is this. If you do need to correct someone or disagree, always structure the conversation in a way that lets them save face and work their own way out of it without being embarrassed, except for absolutely extreme situations. Yep. Is that the book summed up to some degree?
It's that twofold thing of recognize that your job is not to tell people what you want to say or what you want to hear. Your job is to advise them in what they're doing and what they're interested in. Now, if you can inform that in a deeper, better way, that's even better. If you can bring things to their attention they don't know about, that's even better. But at the end of the day, it was the thing I realized when I transitioned from being a lecturer to working, with you and working with Rich in America. And that is, at the end of the day, the person who knows the answer to the question is very often not listened to because they didn't deliver the answer in a way that is relevant to the person who asked the question.
And that is going to lead us into what we're going to talk about in this segment next episode. So for now, arrivederci.
Our 4 Ps. Number 3, problems. I asked the question for the best reason possible. Simple curiosity. Oscar Wilde.
Here is a problem you may face, that suddenly any emails coming from or to your website stop sending. And I discovered that I might have this problem on Saturday morning, which is why I'm really glad we're talking about it today.
Well, you see, this is the ringside seat, you see, being right here where we talk about these things. At the time of recording, it was the previous week when David Murren and I had to stop everything and just focus on this new change to the world of email deliverability that was foisted upon the world in February 2024 when Google and Yahoo decided to really lift the standards of what it is required for it to trust an email going through to its users. And you might think, I don't send much to Gmail people. Well, you probably do. There are about 5 or so billion email accounts on the planet. 1.5 billion of them are Gmail accounts. There's another 250,000, 230, a 250 million emails that are Yahoo. And I've also heard, and I don't know if David Murren, our chief IT web magician, has heard any more of this, but Apple and Outlook have both said they're going to follow suit, but there's no deadline. David Murren, first time joining the Talking About Marketing podcast. Have I got that right? Is that it in a nutshell?
Pretty much so, yes.
How do you then describe it as what we're doing here in trying to deal with this? We'll allow a little bit of rope for some technical terms, and I'll keep my eye on David Olney. When he starts rolling the eyes, I'll call a halt to it.
That's just me being confused. That's fine. It's a normal state of affairs.
David.
I guess for many years, email delivery has been slightly lax, and the rules surrounding it have been very relaxed compared to what they should be. And that allows people to send emails pretending to be somebody else, which everybody in the world has received at some point or the other. And so what we're doing is creating those rules and systems and records around the business's domain names, which means that an email is sent from someone, either from their personal computer, from their email web service, from their CRM, from their mailing list system, from their invoicing system, whatever sends emails on your behalf.
Even a form on your own website ultimately sends an email on your behalf, even if it's just sending it back to you.
That's correct. And what we're doing, I guess, to put it in more of a simple term, in real mail is that, when you write a letter to somebody, you can write sender on the back of the letter. And that tells the person before they open it, it's coming from Steve at Talked About Marketing. When you have a website, when you have a CRM, you're allowing somebody else to write your sender on the back of that little envelope because you want it to come from you, which is okay. What you don't want is some random website writing sender on the back of an envelope and sending it pretending to be you. And that's the difference between what we're trying to stop and what we're trying to allow through.
That is a magnificent analogy. I wish I had gone with that. That was a good one. It's like David Olney's discovered a new bizarre scotch. He's about halfway through the bottle and decides he's going to email the world as Steve at Talked About Marketing. This helps me cut down on that, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
No, it doesn't, because I finish drinking the bottle and then don't send the email because I feel guilty.
Now we know why the eyes are rolling down the back of your head, if that's the reason why.
Big sleep.
All right. So look, David, thank you for that. Basically, on our website, we do have an email deliverability page. It's also flagged at the time of recording on our homepage, where we've got a couple of services that we can offer. There's a one-stop, one-off thing. At the moment, it's $250 plus GST. And David, you basically go through like a stormtrooper, have a chat to someone, find out what is sending email on their behalf, set up all the records properly. And at some level, you might be okay just doing that. But then we've got the Email Guardian, which is an ongoing service that's about $7-ish a month. It's even cheaper if you just pay for it a year at a time. What does that do, David?
That allows us to mainly use your website to create a better deliverability system, so that rather than emails coming from your hosting provider, your emails come from this third-party service, which is set up specifically to create high-end email deliverability. I guess you can look at it as, everybody thinks the website is just sitting on a computer somewhere, and it is, but it's also sitting on the same server as 5,000 other websites. And I guess to go back to the letter analogy, the deliverability of your website is based on the entire server, not on your website. So it's like having 50 housemates. And if one of your 50 housemates send a letter that's got a threatening note in it, cut out of magazine letters, asking for a ransom, then that stops everybody in that house from being able to send mail, because that one person has caused issues. So by using a third-party service, you're removing the need to use or risk using that hosting to send an email, which could mean you lose out on 1, 2, 5 customers and lots of money for your business.
That's also a great analogy too, because most of us are using shared hosting because it is much more affordable. And this is just a little sidestep to keep your email quarantined. Then we haven't got David Olney cutting messages out of magazines. And
I can't do that. It's a great advantage of being blind.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. All right, David Murrin, thank you for coming out of the... What do you call it? The cave that you operate in with all these gizmos and keeping us on the straight and narrow. Quick apology to our regular listeners. We do not sell in this podcast, but we have mentioned these services because, frankly, the stakes are too high.
That's correct.
Our 4 Ps. Number 4. Perspicacity. The one duty we owe to history is to rewrite it. Oscar Wilde.
I always feel a little bit unclean when I talk about other podcasts I listen to on this podcast, but I do. I admit it, David. I listen around. I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's why you have multiple Tinder profiles.
Well, here I want to talk about something I picked up on Sam Harris's podcast called Making Sense. He interviewed Chris Anderson. I've long liked Chris Anderson. He was editor at Wired magazine for a bit. He's had charge of the TED franchise, etc. And fascinating guy. And they got into a discussion about social media and feeling good. And in this particular segment, as you'll hear, Chris Anderson is talking about how he believes talking about positive viral stuff or creating positive viral stuff is the stuff that has a longer shelf life than the negative trends that come and go. In particular, there was a trend on TikTok that he talks about with really privileged, overprivileged, up themselves, rich teenagers who've never had to earn a cent in their life, having great fun in smashing food in their kitchen and just wasting it just for vicarious pleasure for their inner circles and the world at large, watching on all agog. Let's have a listen to what they said.
And I think it's especially clear in the younger generation. I met this kid called Malad Merg, who is, he was inspired by Mr. Beast, who's a big influencer on YouTube, but he just works in a sandwich shop, and he saw these videos on TikTok of, huge amounts of food just being dumped and wasted just for the fun of it, sort of rich kids wasting lots of food in their parents' kitchen. He was disgusted by it, did his own video where he had huge amounts of peanut butter and jelly, and instead turned it into handmade sandwiches, packed up a bunch of them, like 100 plus, went out into the streets and gave them away to people. The reactions, that video was seen by, I think I have this number right, 400 million people, far more than the trend he was taking on. Some of the people who were involved in that other trend flipped camps because of him. And when I spoke to him, he basically said that spreading good stuff online, it's hard. It's definitely harder. It's much easier to do something viral. Anything that evokes an emotion can go viral. You slap someone in the face, that can go viral. But he said, actually, there's an asymmetry here, that doing stuff that's good gets you remembered for the longer term. There's a longer term impact on it. And I think there's a lot of signs that, especially in the next generation, that it's a winnable battle, that people are discovering that the internet can be used to spread goodness, that kindness can go viral. And I take hope from that. And even if it doesn't happen, I don't see any choice other than to try for that, because without that, we're screwed.
Interesting how the man who actually took food and turned it into something that could share with others taps something deeper inside us that resonates. And I think Chris Anderson, I agree with his thesis. I think that stuff will wait around a lot longer, live a lot longer than the other. And of course, this segment, perspicacities, will be think about thinking. And I've got one example, David, before I hear what you want to say about this, but there was a video that I was using in, I reckon, 2008, 2009, and I've seen a remake of this recently, of an older gentleman sitting on a footpath, blind, he's begging, he's got a sign that says, "I am blind, I cannot see," and some people throw a coin or two in his bowl, not very many. And then this young woman stops, looks at the sign, bends down, gets out a texter, turns it over, and we hear her squiggling something. We don't see what she's written. She gets up, she walks away. And next minute, coins, chung, 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 non-stop. And it turns out, we find out when the camera pans back, what she wrote was, "Today is a beautiful day, but I cannot see it." And that connected with people and made them respond. Do you see these two things tied together, something in our psyche, David?
Negative things seem to hit us instantly, but in that negative way of, we pay attention because we don't want the negative to flow onto us. But positive things seem to stick in us and have more of an impact for longer, but you need to do more work to make them. Anyone can pull stuff out of a fridge and break it. But someone making food and then distributing it, or changing that sign. Now, I'd really like to see that changing the sign experiment done again, because I'm not sure how well that example would work. I'm sure examples like it would work.
Or what are you saying? You're saying we're just too close-minded and busy and wouldn't care?
I think now there could be the problem that most people are looking at their phone and wouldn't see the sign. So now it becomes a broader question of situational awareness, of would you even notice the person begging? And now that there are more homeless people, and most of us have a phone in our hand, in my case I don't, because I've got the cane in one and I want the other one free. But I wonder now whether we've lost the degree of situational awareness, where the poignancy of that sign, it would only be people who are used to being situationally aware that would notice.
The deeper irony there is that because we're buried in our phones, and I see it, it's so obvious, everyone is blind and cannot see the world around them. They need the help. They need this gentleman to stick his foot out to make them trip over and go, oh, gee, maybe I should maintain awareness of my surroundings, for crying out loud.
Yeah, like today, I would almost want to try a line on the sign that, says, if you can see that I can't see, would you be willing to help? Let's
close on something with a glimmer of hope, and it involves the BBC. You've got a hunch, David.
Well, not just a hunch, a wonderful thing. A few years ago, the BBC started on Christmas Day doing a thing they called the Happy Pod. And they turned one edition of the Global News podcast on Christmas into only happy news. And I, was doing my yoga practice today and wanted to listen to a podcast and asked for the Global News podcast. And instead, up popped the Happy Pod from yesterday. So it's now being done more frequently. And what it means is, as often as Jackie Leonard records it now, and I've got to go and check how often this now is, you just get happy news. It was wonderful. It was all about people learning to be bird watchers in Uganda so they could become like nature and wildlife guides. It was talking about Joni Mitchell after a huge stroke being able to perform at the Grammys. It was just all this fun and positive stuff that says there's all these good things going on that normally editors skip because there isn't an ambulance to chase.
So instead of tearing down paradise and putting up a parking lot, we could tear away from our phones and gaze at the world around us.
Good move.
Thank you for listening to Talking About Marketing. If you enjoyed it, please leave a rating or a review in your favourite podcast app. And if you found it helpful, please share it with others. Steve and David always welcome your comments and questions, so send them to podcast@talkedaboutmarketing.com. And finally, the last word to Oscar Wilde. There's only one thing worse than being talked about, and that's not being talked about.
Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to AuscastNetwork.com for details.